Lecture number 6. Classification of bone compounds. Types of joints. Joints of the skull bones. Joints of the trunk bones. The connection of vertebrae with each other and with the skull. Spinal column. The connection of the ribs with the spinal column, chest as a whole. Purpose of studying the topic: to gain knowledge about the classification of bone connections, structural elements of joint, as well as an auxiliary apparatus, the joints of the vertebra and the spinal column bends, the joints of the ribs with the vertebra and sternum, the formation of the spinal column as a whole, function, the formation of the chest, shape, size, walls, movement, function, temporomandibular joint, the axis of motion in the joint, atlanto-occipital joint, shape, movement, and list of literature.
In joints joints of thorax and spinal column. Firstly, let's talk about classification. First of all, there are three types of bone connections. First of all, it's syndesmosis. Secondary, it's diarthrosis, and finally, hemiarthrosis. Firstly, what is synarthrosis? Synarthrosis is connections of bones without any movements. No, it's main feature. Secondary, diarthrosis, it's movable connections. And hemiarthrosis, it's just something between these types. Just a little bit movement may be possible. Let's discuss synarthrosis. First of all, what is it? It's types of connections with the connective tissue. And there are also several types of syndesmosis. Firstly, it's connection by ligaments. We can see, for example, let's see here. For example, it's ligaments between two bones. Here between clavicle and scapula. Next is connection. It's interosseous membrane. Its membrane also is connective tissue. For example, it's between radius and ulna. This is interosseous membrane. Well. Next type of connection, it's connection between bones of skull. For example, here we can see sutures. There is connection between both bones of skull. There are several types of suture. Later we will say about it. And the next connection is fontanelles. Fontanelles, it's also connection in newborns, connection in skull. There are connections of these bones in newborn. It's anterior, posterior fontanelles and two side fontanelles, sphenoid and mastoid fontanelles. So its connection due to and with help of connective tissue. Next one type of connection is connection by cartilages, synchondrosis name, cartilages. Its connection first of all between, for example, vertebrae. There are connection by cartilages between bodies of vertebrae, intervertebral discs. Another example is connection of ribs with sternum. It's also connection with cartilages. And there are several types of connections, constant and temporal. Constant connection, it's during all the life of human. This is example. Connection of cartilages between sternum and ribs. And temporal. Temporal means not all life. For example, connection between three pelvic bones, and after 16 years old, 3 of these bones are together. So, and next type of not movable connection is synostosis. Synostosis, it means connection between two bones due to ossification. For example, we can see connections in sacrum. Connection of different sacrum vertebrae due to ossification between them. Next, second type, it's diarthrosis. Diarthrosis means connection in type of joints. It's movable connection. Here we can see many types of connections. For example, it's shoulder joint. Next, radiocarpal joint, etc. So what's the main feature of this connection? It's possible of movement, because the main role of joints is providing of different movements. Why can we move hands, legs, etc.? Because there is movement between two bones inside of joint, and joint has main parts. First of all, it's articular surface. What does it mean? Each bone inside of joint has articular surface. This is ethos and glenate cavity of scapula. There are two articular surfaces. Next main part is articular capsule. Capsule is fibrous tissue that covers all joint. For example, we can see here capsule. Inside of capsule, joint. Next, it's articular cavity. Cavity is inside space of joint. Yes, and this cavity is filled by synovial fluid. Synovial fluid main function is reduction of friction inside of joint to provide smooth movements in joint. Structures of joint, it's labyrinths of joint, discs, meniscs, ligaments, etc. They may be presented, maybe not. Not all joints have additional additional structures. Next one, connection, it's hemiarthrosis. Hemiarthrosis, it's something, something not joint and not syndesmosis. For example, first of all, it's pubic symphysis. As example, pubic symphysis, it's cartilage, and inside we have some narrow space, but it's not joint because it's there are no all components of joint. For example, there is no articular capsule, there is no articular synovial fluid, etc. But at the same time, it's not syndesmosis. It was third time. Next, let's say about biomechanics of joints. First of all, you should know movement types. There are main 3 types of movements. First of all, around frontal plane. It's a movement around frontal plane, flexion and extension. It's example, flexion, extension. Next type, it's a movement around sagittal plane. It's abduction and abduction. It's movement from our body and to body. And next one, it's movement around vertical plane, vertical axle. It's rotation. For example, rotation of forearm. It's rotation. And finally, movement around all planes. It's a circle movement. For example, this is one circle movement. It's about biomechanics. Next one, let's discuss classification of joints. First of all, according to articular surfaces. Firstly, it's simple joint. Simple joint, it means there are only two bones inside of joint. For example, shoulder joint. Only two bones, humerus and scapula. Only two bones. The two articular surfaces. It's simple. Next, complicated. Complicated, it means there are more than two bones in one joint. For example, it's elbow joint. Elbow joint, there are three bones: humerus, ulna, and radius. It's complicated joint. Next one is complex joint. Complex joint, it means there are two floors inside of joint. For example, it's temporomandibular joint. It's joint because this joint is splitted by articular disc in two floors. Yes, and finally we can say about combined joint. Combined joint, for example, it's the same temporomandibular joint. Why? Because to move mandibular, it's needed to have movements in two joints together at the same time. So its classification according to number of articular surfaces. Next, classification according to shape and number of movements in axis, or number of axes. Where is possible movement? Firstly, one axis joints. It's two types: cylindrical and trochlear. Let's discuss firstly cylinder joint. As example, it's here is radio-ulnar joint, proximal and distal. There are cylindrical joint. Why? There is only one axis of movement, rotation. Rotation around of axis, around of supination and pronation. It's cylindrical. Next type is trochlear joint. Trochlear joint, also example is here. We have trochlea of humerus and trochlea notch of ulna, and between these bones trochlea connection. It's also only one axis of movement, flexion and extension. Next type is two axis joints. Two axis, it means movement in two axes already is possible. Ellipsoid joint. It's here. Radiocarpal, let's see here. It's radiocarpal joint. Here is between radius and proximal row of carpi. There is ellipsoid form. That is why we have two axes of movements. It's flexion, extension, and abduction, adduction. Two axes. Next type is condyle type. Condyle type, it's easy to understand. If bone has condyles, that is why here is condyle joint. For example, it's knee joint. Knee joint, it's condyle joint. Why? Because we have medial and lateral condyles of femur and the same medial and lateral condyles of tibia. Between them, condyle joint. And also it's a complex joint. Why? Because there are inside two meniscs, medial and lateral.
Надколенник. Надколенник, скажи, отдельно соединяется как ос.
Also we can see there is patella bone. It's sesamoid bone, the largest sesamoid bone in human body, and it's inside of quadriceps muscle, and it provides smooth movements in knee joint. Так, next two-axis joint, it's saddle joint. Saddle joint, it's as example, it's carpometacarpal connection of the tongue. Here is between first metacarpal joint and trapezoid bone. It's saddle type of joint. Next is three-axis joints. There are three types. Firstly, global shape. Global shape, it means bone usually have head. The best example is shoulder joint. Head and glenoid cavity. There are already three movements, three axes of movements. First of all, it's extension, flexion, abduction, adduction, and rotation. Next type is here. This is an example. Hip joint. Hip joint, it's almost like globe joint shape, but this is different. Why? Because the glenoid cavity is bigger and deeper, and name is cup-shaped joint. Cup-shaped joint. The same, we have the same movements. And the final type of three-axis joint is flat joint. Flat joint as example, it's a joint between sacrum and ilium. Two auricular surfaces are connected and form flat joint. Why is it flat? Because there are two flat articular surfaces are connected. There are three axes of movements, but these movements very little. So we can say there is almost absence of any movements. So it was classification according to a number of movements in axis.